Scott Land. I'm with Buffalo Brand Seed Company. Is that camera right? Good. Can you see me on that?
I think so.
Okay, sounds great.
I hope so.
We'll do the whole thing over again. Questions?
I'm not gonna do that.
I'm with Buffalo Brand Seed Company. I have cards up here. I've got just some general brochures sitting up here that is what we sell over here at the greenhouse. My main objective today is to help you guys out with any questions you have. So we can go through all questions. I've got time. I've got the afternoon if we need to take it. You know, we're going to go through some seeding techniques. We're going to go through, pretty much some of the erosion techniques. There's stakes and staples over there. There's what we call straw wattles, which are the big, long straw nets, basically, that you can direct water for, especially as your water, the snow starts to melt down before your population of grass or whatever is left in that soil starts over. You know what? I forgot the most important thing. We are truly sorry that you guys have gone through this. And that is, number one, I've been a Colorado resident since 1978. Can't tell you how many forest fires we've seen. This is something that's part of our business, but this is never a part of our business we ever want to try to get excited about. This means somebody's really gone through a tragic and scary loss. So we're going to go through the seed mixes, natives. We'll talk a little bit about wildflowers. We'll talk a little bit about what fire does into the forest. Fire, for the most part, is not the worst thing for a forest to have. From what we can tell, as far as the generation of, or the radar Doppler, whatever they use to measure the heat of this fire didn't burn hot enough to kill the ground. Because a lot of times you'll see that the Hayman fire is the most famous one that really just wiped out the vegetation underneath. It burned so hot that August that it wiped out the vegetation and it killed about 3.5 feet worth of soil. So this one we don't think did that. There's going to be parts that burn hotter than others. And there's going to be areas where you're looking at either your field, the slope, or whatever, and you realize one part of it is coming back up, and the other one is just completely barren. You have no idea why. It's because that soil is going to take some time. It's going to be dead soil. Let's look at, does everybody have an idea of the seed mix? There's a East Troublesome Fire seed mix that we put over here, that we did a custom mix for you guys. I brought a copy of the one that the county is recommending. And I don't ever like to disparage people who have looked at seed and really, their ideas and whatnot, but we're going to talk about why I think what we put together is a little bit better than what this is, because there are some certain varieties and some certain seeds that I really want to see people plant, that if you have something where you really need this, there are bins and other seed mixes over there that can be sufficient for you on that one. So, I don't want to just kill your printer, but if anybody, I brought 2 copies of this, and I'll pass these around. The black and white copy is the one the county is recommending. Of course, I gave myself the color copy of the 2 seed mixes. So I'll pass these around for you guys to kind of take a look at, maybe take a picture with your phone if you want to.
Make some copies.
And like I said, I didn't want to kill your copy. Yeah.
Okay.
Then we'll all take donations for toner at that point. So, all right, so I think where I want to go here. I'm going to go with, let's talk about planting. Quick show of hands. How many people have a place where they want to plant seed, or they need something reclaimed that's flat, that's a flat area? We got a few of those. Slopes, like heavy slopes. What about forested areas? Okay, perfect. So those are really the 3 main parts I'm gonna go with. The flat areas, we're going to assume are much more like a meadow, like a true water-containing meadow. That's where I'm going to make a educated guess that the fire moved pretty quick and you have some pretty good live soil. When the plant material burns, when the carbon burns up top, that plant material goes down, so you have carbon, and the most important thing you have, which we all know is potash, but you have potassium that goes down into the soil. So the potassium is a wonderful binder of nutrients, and it's able to release micronutrients back into the soil. So that's why a lot of species come back up and flourish even better in the potassium, with that extra potassium inside the soil. So when you're planting on a flat area, there are the three #1 rules on any planting technique is seed to soil contact, meaning you really want to try to rough that soil up a touch. With the caveat, be careful when you're roughing that soil up, especially if it's black. The potash is good for the seeds in the soil, it is not good for your lungs. So really, really take that into consideration as you're preparing the soil for the seed to be planted. The second thing I always try to talk about is the right seed and the right amount of seed. So when we make seed recommendations per acre, you can bump it up a little bit, but don't double it, please. Because what you'll end up having is a very crowded group of plants. And you want Grand County, you don't want New York City. If you get New York City growing up where there's a million different seedlings, they're all gonna come up 3 inches and then just die, and you're gonna be left with a much, much bigger mess than you had prior to this. Really try to follow those seed recommendations as far as the planting techniques go, or excuse me, as far as the planting rates go. Your third planting technique, and this is again on a slope, on a flat area in a forest, try to get the seeds covered with a bit of soil. An easy way to think about this, and I'll go pull a handful of seed over here just in a second. Any seed, it doesn't matter if it's a pine seed, a grass seed, a carrot seed, does not matter, wants to be underneath the soil 1.5 times the size of the seed itself. That is a global, hands down, every seed in the world, that's what it wants to be. It wants to go down beneath the soil 1.5 times itself. So I'm gonna grab a handful of seed real fast. And let's just take a look at this. My mask on here. If you look at this seed, that only wants to go 1.5 times down beneath. It does not need to be buried 2 inches, 3 inches, 5 inches beneath the soil, okay? You don't need to farm your field or your area. You don't need to farm it like it's middle Iowa and corn planting season. All you're looking to do is just gain some ruts within that soil to get this seed in there. And then try to drag some soil over, broadcast something, but you don't want to cover these guys too deep. You just want just a touch, just a little bit of soil, enough to cover it, enough where it's going to say, hey, it's time to germinate, we're going to rock and roll. Because once it germinates, then the roots are establishing themselves. A very common question I get asked, and I get asked this question from Jackson, Wyoming to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Can I just throw that seed out there? You can, it's a free country, you're welcome to do anything you like. You typically want to try to get that seed underneath the soil. You want to make sure the seed's going underneath the soil. Because nature will take that seed underneath the soil. They might do it through a bird dropping. It might do it through the wind picking it up and carrying it to your neighbor's property. Nature wants to plant that seed, but it's just not going to plant the seed where you want it to be. And it's probably not going to do it in the time frame you want it to be. So really, 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 I can't emphasize this enough. If you have trouble trying to rake in the seed or trying to cover the seed, if you don't have a tractor, find someone who can. And it needs to be a harrow, a drag harrow is a perfect way to plant native seed, even in the forested areas. Somebody with a 4-wheeler, maybe a chain link fence, that can drag some of that seed, all you're looking to do is try to drag that over. So we talked about a flat spot, the meadow, the perfect area to try to go plant seed. Now let's talk about a slope. So when you're planting a slope, you want to plant it two ways. You want to get on top of that slope and really try, I mean, if you can't walk the slope, if you can't really, take your spreader and do this, try to get on top of that slope and try to get that seed down as much as possible. When you're planting a slope, let me give you a general, well, we're going to do this. Here is your slope. Do not make your lines this way. You always want to go across to have lines embedded in that slope for the seed and the water to catch. Because what ends up happening is if you have this, if you just stand at the bottom of your slope and you rake up and down and rake up and down, you actually want to get on that slope and rake across the slope, or else Mother Nature is going to carry all that seed. You're going to have a gorgeous base of that slope. Probably a little too much, but nothing up top. And so then it's just going to wash on top of what is gorgeous and kill it. So you really want places for the seed and the water to land on that slope, okay? I've taken everything from just kind of a augmented garden trowel where you're just cutting cutting part of that slope into some ditches into that slope. Really, that is the number one most important and the mistake I see people making when they're planting a slope. They just stand at the bottom of the slope or they go to the top of the slope and they rake down and they don't realize they're just creating these water runways of just taking the seed down to the base. Forested areas. When you're planting a forested area, the small rocks are your friends. The small rocks, as you're dragging or raking through, the small rocks will create, as it gets picked up and rolled over, it just created this gorgeous little place for seed to land and grow and for water to collect. And so don't be afraid to say, hey, it's pretty rocky. The small rocks up to, yay big or however big you could move them, those are your friends. Those are what you want. The big ones are hard. If you have a forested area that doesn't have a lot of trees, or you can see some larger boulders, that thing is 45 feet deep in the ground, you're probably not going to get a lot of grass growing on top. All you want is just enough coverage of that grass to be able to establish a bit of a root zone to just stabilize that soil so it's not coming down onto your property, it's not washing into the river or whatnot. So we talk about slopes, flats, forest, expectations. What this native mix is, it's got a little bit of what we call quick guard. So quick guard is just a triticale, which is a mix between rye and wheat that doesn't, it's not supposed to come back, and up here it's not going to come back. You guys don't have a long enough growing season for it to really get a viable seed head and then come back every year. All that is just simply, we just need that to get up and grow within 5 to 7 days and just start rocking. Now up here, your expectation, when I say 5 to 7 days on that quick guard, that's going to be probably more closer to 10 to 14 days up here because you guys have just such colder nights and your growing season is just shorter. We put a lot of wheatgrasses in ours. Wheatgrasses are big, gorgeous bunch grasses. They establish very quickly. They're very drought tolerant. They are able to grow in a high nitrogen, high fertilized area. What people don't realize is these fires also bring up minerals from the ground that have not been available to that ground for a very long time. So calcium, salts, things that act, not in conduciveness sometimes for what you're wanting to grow. So the difference between these two custom mixes, the one that the county does, which is a fine mix, but it's got mammoth red clover, which please, please, please do not plant red clover in your property. I put it on mom and dad's property in Summit County. That was 2003. I still can't get rid of it. It's 2021. I'm going to go back up in June and fight that. So please try to stay away from the red clover. It gets aggressive, it flowers. The bees love it, the rabbits love it, and it goes everywhere. They've got some Alsike clover in here, which is not bad. All they're trying to do with these clovers is put the nitrogen back into the soil. I don't typically find after a fire that the nitrogen is truly the problem. Usually, if there was plant vegetation growing before, that soil had enough to sustain the roots of some of the native species. It should be fine, even with the added in potassium and the added in nutrients that are coming from the char. They have Kentucky bluegrass in this one. Probably not something you're gonna put out in a field or a forest. They have triticale. We call it quickguard. That's okay. That's what we want to have, a very fast germination to be able to come in. So on ours that we recommend is I've got one that's the top one, the custom seed mix, slender wheatgrass, mountain brome, western wheatgrass, we call regreen quickguard, and a sandberg bluegrass. The sandberg bluegrass is not bluegrass. It's a cousin of the Kentucky bluegrass, but it is a truly a wider blade, a very, very drought hardy native here to the Rocky Mountains. That grows from Montana all the way till about the San Juans down south, and then you don't see it very much further as you get into New Mexico. Western wheatgrass. The other thing they have in here that I saw, they have sheep's fescue. We put in some mountain brome. We didn't put a lot of fescue in here. Fescue, as much as I love that grass, it's not really quick to grow. You'll get mountain fescue coming back into you. Sheep fescue is its European cousin, its Scottish cousin. It's called sheep fescue because that's what the sheep would eat off the fields out in Scotland. You put mountain fescue and sheep fescue next to each other. I'm an expert in this thing. I can't tell the difference. I think it's the same plant, just with different names. So it's not the worst fescue to have, but it's going to come back in. The birds and the rabbits and deer love sheep fescue, mountain fescue. They will replant that one in there. We typically stuck a mountain brome, which is the big wide blade green grass you see popping up in the ditches, and the first sunny spot that you get here in about 3 weeks. Like as soon as this melts, you're gonna see some little kind of wide blade green grass grow. Those are either wheatgrasses or bromes, and that's one of the reasons we put those in these fire vegetation mixes. They're the first things to come in, and that's what we want for vegetation. There's a few different wheatgrasses based on heat tolerance. There's western wheatgrass I talked about, slender wheatgrass. That one's going to grow a little bit better down in your meadow areas. It likes some wet feet. It doesn't mind being down in the meadow and having it flood on an afternoon. We kept it very simple. We kept it very quick. You can always augment with some mountain meadow or some of the native mixes that we carry here at the greenhouse. If this isn't coming up, or you're like, hey, I want to throw the kitchen sink at this, take Mountain Meadow, take this one. This total pounds per acre is about 24. You can plant a Mountain Meadow, a Western native mix, one of these custom mixes. You can plant those at about 30 to 35 pounds an acre. Any more than that, you say, give me one 50-pound bag and that's going to go for the acre. You put too much seed down, it's not going to be healthy in 2 years. You want your planting to be healthy this year, and we want to recover that property like we need to immediately for the insurance company, for everybody involved. But we also want to have that be a sustainable planting in the next decade or so that it can sit there and really do its job on sustaining that soil. All right, so expectations. Let's go back to that. When you plant this, it's going to take longer to germinate, and it's going to take longer to really fill in than you expect. This is not growing a golf course down in Florida where it's going to be green and lush in 7 days. This is going to be a long road. So really, the sooner you get your seed in, the better. There's what's called cold stratification. A lot of these plants, if you think about it, they grow up naturally, they go to a seed head, they get knocked down by a snowstorm, by an elk, by a moose, by a four-wheeler, and they sit there on the ground over the winter. You get 7 feet of snow on top of it, that pushes down the soil, and as soon as that comes back up in the springtime, that ground temperature hits about 42 degrees, it wants to pop. So your expectations are going to be, you want to get this seed in to try to simulate that that seed's been sitting there all winter. So some nice cold nights are actually good for it, and that's going to be okay. Because what that does is that kicks that seed into gear and says, aha, hey, it's 13 degrees out tonight. I can hang out for a minute. As soon as it warms back up, it's like, oh, hey, it's spring. Perfect. I'm ready to grow. You know, and if you wait for it to get warm enough to grow, some of that seed's going to say, no, it's still September. I'm going to chill out. I'm going to wait until I get that cold stratification, until I know that winter's happening. And the reason they do that, columbine, our state flower, is a perfect example of this. Columbine grows up here in Summit County. You know, that plant's starting to grow in maybe mid-May, early June, and then you get your Memorial Day snowstorm. And then you maybe get a couple more freezes, and it finally goes to flower in July. Well, once that goes to flower, then a bee comes and pollinates it. That then goes into a seed head. That seed head's green until maybe mid-August, late August, and then that seed drops on the ground. Well, it's on the ground at Labor Day, maybe 1st of September. If that plant were to grow up, what do we get the second week of September? It snows, it freezes. Well, that little baby plant, that little seedling is not gonna be able to survive. So what Columbine does is it says, hold on, I'm not going to grow until I get 2 full solid weeks of frozen temperatures. And then when it warms up, then I know that winter has happened, and then I shall grow. And so a lot of these seeds have adapted to that. So understand that you actually, your ideal planting time is now, and then I probably would recommend go ahead and replant or put some more seed out sometime around Halloween up here. Just try to gauge when your snow cover is going to happen. Late October, don't do it too early in October. If you're, you know, my general rule for seed planting is, if you're in a short sleeve t-shirt and jeans, you are either way too early in the fall or way too late in the spring. You want to be wearing your Carhartt, you want to be wearing your hats, you want to be wearing your gloves. Planting seed should not be the most comfortable thing for you to do. It should be a very cold experience because that's what the seeds want to have happen up here. Right seed, right place. Right seed, right place. When we talk about native mixes, we talk about pasture mixes. You know, we have a Western native mix that's fairly similar to the one that we have, although our Western native mix kind of flows into that western slope, the Grand Junction area, you know, those hot, dry areas. So we've got a couple grasses that will go into there. Your meadows, if this thing is going to be hayed or if you're going to release animals onto it, really try to stick with like a mountain meadow mix. That's something that those plants are used to being grazed, they're okay with being grazed. If you release animals onto one of these mixes, they're gonna kill that plant. Those roots are not gonna be established enough for them to grow out there. Deer and elk, they don't typically clear out their foraging areas. Whereas horses or cows or any of the domesticated animals really will. They'll clear out a native area because they're not, their jaw structures and just the way they bite and the way they eat is just not set for a native species. Plus those plants are not going to go well inside their tummies as well. So, give me just 1 second here. Those are your seed mixes. Let me do it on time. Let's talk for a second about the erosion control side of things. There's straw blankets out there, and those straw blankets, basically, I can't remember the exact coverage on them. Just give me 1 second here, I can tell you. Okay, those blankets cover 900 square feet, okay? When you put those out, do you need them? You don't necessarily need them, especially if you have a flat area. I would honestly tell you to let nature have its chance If you have a sloped area, I would put the straw blanket down. There's staples, and you wanna at least staple the corners, and then get yourself a line of staples going down through the center. There is, the more staples that it will hold, the better. Those staples are going to have to come out at some point. Typically, they're most likely are gonna stay once that blanket really erodes into it, and they're photosensitive, so they're going to take the sunlight and really degrade. I would say winter's probably actually gonna degrade those blankets more than the summertime is up here because the climate is so harsh. But you don't necessarily have to go back in and lift those things up 2 years down the road. You can leave them in there if you want. If you feel like the grass cover is good enough that sometime in the fall, once it's all nice and dried out, you wanna go back in there and lift up and get all the staples out of there, that's fine too. There's wattles, so the wattles are 25 feet in length. So when you're taking a wattle and you take a line, here's your straw wattle, and you're going to curve it around your driveway. Okay, you want to put stakes that are sitting over there. Take a big hammer, or find someone with a big, it doesn't need to be a sledge, just as big of a hammer as you can, and drive it through the ends. And you want to try to get it every 5 to 7 feet based on how much water is going to collect. Just make sure it's staked in there. Make sure it's staked in there. A couple of extra stakes is not going to hurt, because if you really think about the rushing of a rainstorm that happens, you guys get one of those just downpours that comes over down the valley. All of a sudden, what was perfectly just grass that accepted all that moisture is now nothing but bare dirt or black soil, and it's just flying down the road. Try to keep that in mind when you put the stakes in, because that water carries a lot more pressure. If I sit here and I just push you once, and you're not gonna fall over. What happens if I just stand here and keep pushing? I'm 205 pounds. I stand here and push you for 25 minutes. You're probably after 25 minutes gonna be like, all right, I'm done. So just think about that as the water is coming down, okay?
Do those stakes go through the wattle
They do.
or
Yeah.
on each side of the
Now
wattle?
they go right through it. So what happens is I've got a wattle here, and I pop that thing in there, and then I just pound it all the way through, as hard as I can go until this thing disappears down into the straw wattle.
You shouldn't see it at all.
You don't want to, no. Unless you hit a rock, and then you're gonna feel it in your arm, and probably the next day. So, at that point, pull the stake out and maybe move it 3 feet over. So, because a halfway in stake is not gonna do a whole lot, other than you're gonna forget it's there and trip over it and
And you don't need any stakes on the downside?
downside.
Well, if you're putting it on a hill, on the,
So we're talking about, I'm talking about a straw wattle.
right, but you don't
Okay.
need it where it's going, like if the water's coming this way, you don't need it, any stakes there
No,
to keep it.
no, you just want it right through the center, just right through the center. Does everybody know what a wattle looks like? Okay.
Where do you place that?
At the base or at the point of where you want the water diverted. So these can actually, there could be, it doesn't just have to be at the base. If you're like, hey, that's a lot, that's a big hillside. That thing, and you kind of look at, say your driveway's running down, and you look and you know that when it rains, it was washing out your driveway or the roadside before. Put a wattle in there and maybe divert some of that water down a little bit further. Now remember, anytime you divert water, you're concentrating water. So as that exits the wattle, it's gonna create the same problem you were trying to avoid right at the base, right at the exit of where that water's going. So just keep that in mind, that water has to go somewhere. So if you're forcing it out, you're gonna force it into some place where then maybe you need another wattle. Or you're forcing it into some place where you're like, hey, that place can collect a bunch of water. That's not a big deal. Just really try to think 4 or 5 steps ahead, a rainstorm ahead, on where you're trying to divert that water to. It's okay to have a wattle up top and then another one down below it in the middle of a hillside. And that way you're catching one half up here, and it's coming off, and then you're catching the bottom half of the water down here, and it's coming off, so you're not just getting an entire hillside of water coming off one wattle, where it's basically just gonna, you can stake that wattle in as far as you want to. Sooner or later, you get 3-4 rainstorms, and those stakes are gonna be exposed, that thing's gonna be floating. And so you're gonna look out the kitchen window, hey honey, why is the wattle floating right down the front yard? Oh, that's because we just diverted 5 rainstorms and it washed out underneath it, and now it's becoming part of the debris. So just really keep that in mind. That's one of the most important parts about trying to get this seeded area to grow, because those plants accept that water very aggressively. You know, those roots are really good at opening up pores to get down into the ground, so that a 1-inch rainstorm, that's just a heavy burst rainstorm, doesn't necessarily have to flow, because it's got places to go already to go down. So that's that's the key to using, you know, to really getting that seed down. I think at that point, that's probably everything I have as far as a presentation goes. I'd like to take questions. Who wants to throw one at me? Yes, sir.
Wildflowers or grass, is there something that, in our yard, either one works as an aphrodisiac for voles?
Sure.
And is there any of these that are more vole-proof than others?
No. Wildflowers typically are a little bit more vole-proof, just because the voles don't want to eat the roots of them. But no, they're going to go right underneath that. You know what? That reminds me. We talk about flowers. Flowers up here, especially, try to get those down a little bit earlier than even the grasses, because those take about 21 days to germinate. So just remember that if you wait until May 31st to plant your wildflowers, you're really not going to see that until about the 4th of July. You're probably not going to get a lot of flowers the first year. I get those flowers in soon, quickly, as soon as this comes off, you know, just so that they have some time to soak up some water. But as far as voles go, one of the reasons I use a lot of the wheatgrasses can typically take a vole. They're pretty aggressive. If you think about a wheatgrass, I mean, that grass is only going to be 2 blades when it starts to grow this year. The western wheatgrass gets as big as this plate. That's the size of that, that's the mature size of that grass. So one vole going right through it is not going to harm it, because it's got roots that are stretching all the way to 2, 3, 4 feet down in the ground. That's the most important part about using natives or native-esque grasses. If you use, you know, we look at turf grass, and turf has a root zone of about 3 feet. There's a wonderful USDA or NRCS picture that shows you all the different native grasses, these fescues, these wheatgrasses, how deep those roots really go. I think they have it on the website. It's fascinating to look at, and you realize just what a wonderful ecosystem it creates underneath the ground for the voles, because the voles are actually going to follow those roots down. The plant did the work of the digging. The voles is going to go right down through there. That's the, you know, gophers as well. No, I don't have a great answer for voles. Prairie dogs is what we fight out on the eastern side of it.
Same thing with something to kill them with, other than my 22 with birdshot.
You know,
Cats. Get a cat. Get a lot of cats.
yeah, get a cat. Really encourage the foxes, really encourage the coyotes. One of the great things about planting flowers bring in bugs. Bugs bring in predators. Predators eat voles. You know, those are at the bottom of the food chain, and because then they're eating the plants. And so the more diversity and the more ecology you can give your area, the better off that area is going to be, because you're bringing in, you know, a lot of the bees, but then the bees brings in the snakes, and then the snakes, they want to eat the voles, and then you know, the hawk sitting up there on the telephone pole or whatever wants to eat the snake, but if it can't get the snake, it's going to grab the vole. And so you want to really try to encourage a very diverse ecosystem in there. And that typically, that's where I think we see a big prairie dog problem down on the Front Range, or vole problem up here. We really have developed ourselves out of a good predator population. A healthy predator population, much as we don't want to see, you know, Bob was jogging through his neighborhood and the mountain lion just came up from behind him. You don't want to see that, but that mountain lion is a very crucial part of the ecology. Now, I will not, for political reasons and my own health and safety, get into the wolf talk here. But again, alpha predators create a wonderful downstream on a balanced ecosystem where you're not having an entire field ruined by a rodent that wouldn't be doing that naturally. Yes, ma'am.
When you talk about the county mix, is that the mix that we got grass from Middle Park Conservancy last fall, and that's in, and I mean, it's already spread on our
Sure.
lot. And, should we overseed that with the Mountain Meadow mix, or is it already thick?
I would leave it be for now, and then in the fall, do an overseed with, say, a mountain meadow or something that doesn't have bluegrass in it, doesn't have some
Okay.
clovers in it. I would leave, if you planted it at the correct planting rate, hopefully, you know, or maybe not double it, it's okay. Just leave it be, because if you went in and planted more seed, then you actually create a much bigger problem, where
Okay,
you have too many seedlings trying to grow in too small a space.
okay.
So, I believe you next.
Yeah, I have quite a few acres that need to be treated. And, you know, some of the soil is darker than other parts of the soil, so I'm assuming some of it burned worse than others. But I can't get too scientific about it and try to treat each little section differently. Plus I have a lot of clay in the soil. So if I were to wanna cover a big area, what do you suggest?
What kind of area is it? Is it forested?
That's, well, it was forest. But there
Forested
were-
being a relative term.
Yes, and there were areas that we had already logged out,
Okay,
you know, and we had planted, several years ago and got a pretty good, mixture of grass going. Now a lot of that has been eaten up, but not all of it, you know,
Right.
some of it survived. But I've got slope, I've got flat, I mean, I've got a little bit of everything. How do I simplify this?
that's one of the reasons that we did this mix, the East Troublesome Fire mix. It's a very generalized mix. I would go with that one to
Okay.
start. If it's too meadowy, if it's something that you're like, hey, we had our horses grazing out there, you can put some mountain meadow in there. Now remember, these only come by the 50-pound bag, so as far as that goes, you can get a little scientific and diversify your plantings based on a 50-pound bag. So, all right, I'm gonna buy 4 of these, and then I'm gonna buy 4 mountain meadows, and we're gonna have this be the line that I do the East Troublesome Fire mix here, and I do the mountain meadow mix over here.
Okay, one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
Tiny.
Time.
I can't do all of it right now,
Sure.
because we're gonna have to be clearing out dead trees in certain areas, so we're gonna be trampling all over the place.
Sure.
Should I go ahead and still seed as much as I can right now? And, you know, I know you talked about doing it now and doing it in the fall. Is there any benefit to also doing it in the middle of the summer if you just freshly cut down a bunch of trees?
Sure, absolutely. That seed, if it grows, it's gonna grow up. You know, most of these seeds are designed to grow up, go to sleep for the winter, and come right back. And so if that seed, if it wants to grow, it's gonna grow. It might not have a full season, but it's gonna grow, and then it's gonna gather as much energy for the roots as possible and go to sleep. There is another option. So over here, there's like low grow mix that I would typically tell you to put it like on your lawn, but it's not gonna be invasive. If you wanna put that down, it's a very fast germinating mix. That could be a temporary part where you're like, that was a $10 worth of seed. I'm not afraid to drive over to that thing as we're logging it. We just need to stabilize it. Don't be afraid to do that. For that, just realize you're gonna have to go reseed that at some point with something much more permanent, but I would not be afraid of just putting down a temporary, what we would call a cover crop. That's non-invasive, is not coming back. So, the low grow, we call it the low grow high altitude mix is what we call that here. That's a great mix. It's more for a kind of high altitude lawn area is what we use it. You know, it's not quite Kentucky bluegrass, but it's really not a pasture mix.
Yeah, we've used that before.
it's a hybrid one, so that's what I probably would tell you to put down.
Do you end up having to mow that stuff? That low growth stuff?
It really doesn't get terribly tall. Even if you let it go all season long, it's only getting this tall. That's why we call it maybe a tall growing lawn or a short growing pasture mix. But if it's not getting water, the chances of you having to mow that are very slim.
Okay, well, I have a question.
Yes,
We lost our house, obviously, and so around the house, we don't want a weed patch of tall, I don't want a weed patch of tall grasses.
sure.
So, but we're obviously gonna be building, and it was totally disturbed because they cleaned up the lot. So now
Yeah.
what about that soil? Should we, it's clear now, we're gonna start building in May, it's gonna get disturbed again. Should we go throw some seeds out there anyway, and where it grows, and then let it get disturbed, or what do you suggest? And then, do you suggest the low grow just because it's around the house?
I would suggest a low grow. Really, your seeding question that you have to ask, what was underneath there before? And what is my erosion possibility? You know, what's Mother Nature gonna bring at me? Like, if I don't have this seeded, if there's no stabilization for that soil, is that going to create a problem? Is it gonna wash down that hillside? Is it gonna wash out this area? Is it, you know, really what you're looking for at that point is, where do I need to seed to make sure that Mother Nature doesn't mess with the construction, or we don't have to then turn around and bring a truckload of rocks in, or we don't have to bring a whole nother avenue of erosion control in. So that's really the question I would ask. As far as an area that's gonna be disturbed, yeah, you could put a little grow in there, and then really kind of, once your house is built, look at how you want that landscaping to be, or how you want, where do you want the forest to transition into a livable area for the grandkids, or the dogs, or whoever it may be coming over. So, but low grow works as a great lawn up here, it works really nice. Yes, sir.
Now, what's the upper elevation limit for your mountain meadow mix?
Upper elevation limit is tree line, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I've seen that thing grow. I mean, it grows right above Arapahoe Basin. There's a guy that planted that with his field. He can't be 500 feet away from tree line. So, it doesn't get as thick as it does, say, down here at Granby Ranch, or right outside of Steamboat. No, it doesn't get that thick, but it definitely grows. So I would not concern yourself with the elevation. I mean, what's tree line up here? Is that 10.5, 11?
It's gonna be closer to 11.
Close to 11, so I wouldn't worry about that. So, yes, ma'am.
A series of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
In addressing using the wattle, being mindful of where you're diverting water, neighbors, how it's gonna affect them. And then the whole, premise of us wanting to, get ground coverage in a landscape that has been affected by the fire. Do be mindful as far as where you're located, and native and non-native, because in time, and like you said, red clover, avoid it at all costs. My question for you, I'm the chair of the Grand Lake Cemetery Committee. 30% of the cemetery was consumed by the fire, and I do have my western flank of the cemetery, and there is slope that goes down into drainage. So, and that's where it got roached real bad. First off, I'm working within the jurisdiction of the national park. And the NRCS blend, the park will not accept.
Correct.
So my question for you, and I failed to bring the list with me, I have all the acceptable species of trees, shrubs, grasses for Rocky Mountain National Park. If I were to get a hold of you, I see different ways to get a hold of you by phone, fax, email, whatever. Would you guys be able to make a blend that can be used up there? And secondly, can it be, do you guys offer or have, I work with Paul Harrington on things, but we may really need to be looking at like a hydro seed slurry mix for it to really help bind and, keep that down. So if I was able to get a list of grass that are acceptable, get that to you, see if you even have those available, and can a blend be made?
It can be, absolutely, we can do custom blends. You could actually ask Sean and Peggy here to get a price and just, since they've already carried seed, get it coming up here, 100% we can do that.
Okay,
These plants should be on that list and should be approved by the NRCS. That's one of the reasons we use these. This top blend right here, which has the Regreen Quick Guard, I would typically recommend that because that should not, the Regreen Quick Guard is those are sterile plants just to get the ground cover to establish the rest of the natives.
sure,
And that's what I would typically tell you to use within the boundaries of the national park.
right.
If it's on the cemetery side, now I don't know what you had within the cemetery in the grave sites, if it was a lawn area, or
Yeah.
just simply what was growing naturally there, then I would utilize,
Okay.
this.
Yeah, and again, the NRCS blend, it's not acceptable.
Which is hilarious that the NRCS blend would not be acceptable in the national park.
I know.
But these should be national park approved. I would actually look at this, or we absolutely do custom blends. We do them all the time.
Another question, you said 30 to 35 pounds would do an acre, and then you have 50-pound bags. Do you,
Typical, it's a pretty generalized, that's usually what I want people to go for. Sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 50, but most of the time, 30, 35.
so my question leading to, do you have bags that are maybe like 30 or 35 pound if one isn't needing a 50-pound bag?
Yeah, I believe we do. Did we get, we got smaller ones as well? I think we got 25-pound bags. I don't remember the total size here. Yeah, I believe, we have a 25-pound bag, you've got a 50-pound bag.
Okay, okay.
And
then,
most likely, you could probably talk the ladies into opening a bag and everybody can grab a scoop if they need one. So,
okay. And then another question, you said potassium, will be occurring, naturally due to the fire, and that potassium is, works as a binder. And through the bear assessments that the various agencies went through, there are some areas that were definitely splitter bite. Nothing's gonna come back.
I'll
in
bet,
those areas,
I'll bet.
due to the high temp.
Yeah.
So in those areas, would it be advisable to add potassium and get that put into the ground to help, or, talking with some folks that have been dealing with this a long time in some areas, as you mentioned, the extreme heat of an Amon fire, some areas just really aren't coming back,
No, they're
and
not.
so it's field studies, case studies to see what will work. So my question, do you think adding potassium to terra firma, getting that mixed in would help with that?
I do. I think any type of nutrient that plant root can grab a hold of, all you're looking to do is try to get that plant to grow, and then it's gonna gather its energy from the photosynthesis, sending it back down to the roots, as well as trying to gather up nutrients from the soil. When you have a complete sterilized area like that, that Hammond fire, 2002?
Yeah.
I just drove through that 3 weeks ago. There are still bear spots. Like, it is fascinating to me how, and they're not, there's grass that is growing on either side of that area. It is still bare in there.
Now, I don't mean to monopolize
No,
the
you're
time.
fine. I've got plenty of time. I don't know if the
Okay,
rest of you.
so a lot of folks, we've been shipping material up here from the Beetle Kill and
Sure.
all,
Yep.
and, it certainly doesn't go into your garden beds because it still has too much pitch in it, but for walkways and whatnot. Your thought process on, seed being distributed, and let's say it's not a particularly, sloped area, that the broadcast, probably no more than ½ inch to inch of the wood chip material to go down on top of it, and have you worked with that? and seen
Yeah,
any outcomes?
the one thing to remember on wood chips, and this is one thing, wood chips work in your favor the second and third year. The first year, believe it or not, as they are breaking down, They're pulling nutrients out of the soil. That's the one kind of misnomer. People are like, oh, we'll throw down wood chips in our garden. It's gonna look great because it's gonna compost underneath it. That is true. On the second, third, fourth year from then on until the end of time. The first year, it is actually competing against the plant life for the nutrients in that soil. It'll re-release it. Most of the time, the plants are gonna be able to grow through it. Most of the time, the plants are gonna be able to gather enough nutrients. And remember, there's nutrition and there's energy stored within the seed itself from the previous plant. So you've already got an advantage at that point. But yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about the wood chips. Just don't. You don't need a 5-inch cover.
Yeah.
You know, ½ inch is just gonna wash away or blow away. 1 inch probably is your money depth on that one. So,
And I like that you mentioned about the potash with the actual water owl out there raking. I'm getting ready, I'm gonna have a cadre of volunteers up there, and we will be raking, and I'm providing them with KN 95 masks
I
for
would,
their
yeah.
respiratory, making sure they have
Yeah.
eye protection as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you guys are all gonna look like coal miners coming
Oh,
out
they're
of,
in 5X suits, so
yeah.
we're around the line and scooting
Yeah.
around so we're not in flash.
and then you're gonna have the medical problems of the coal miners, if you're not careful. So just be aware of that. That is not a free, that's not, even if you can't see those particulates,
Right.
there's still a lot of particulates in there. So, yes, sir.
We're gonna be laying down wattles next Thursday to
Okay.
protect the watershed around Columbine Lake. Where do you put the water if you don't want it to run into the fishery?
At your least favorite neighbor's house. No, I'm just kidding.
We could do that.
When you said that, be careful. It reminded me of the joke. You're gonna find out who likes you. on who's putting the water down towards you. The ideal answer to that question is when you're catching water, when you're capturing and diverting something, you want a catch basin before it gets into the river. If there is not, that's a hard question to answer. It really is. Try to get that seed down. Try to get something up as quick as possible for that catch to happen.
So we could engineer catch basins.
Yeah, really,
Yeah,
all you're
yeah.
looking to do is try to catch that water. Water, look at Newton's law, and I don't remember which law relative it is, but energy is neither created nor destroyed. Water ain't going anywhere. It's either going from the sky, down the road, or down into the soil, but it's not going anywhere until it then goes into a plant, gets reabsorbed by the atmosphere, and the cycle goes on. So you always have to think of that water is never created nor destroyed. It just is where it is at that particular time. And if you're trying to guide it someplace, you want to make sure that the end of that guidance doesn't create another problem. Straw bales work really well at collecting water. That's what these straw wattles, these straw wattles, you can lift one, I can lift one, some of us guys in here, we could lift maybe 2 or 3 of them. You give that one rainstorm, you couldn't have a cow drag that thing. Like they get to be about 1,000 pounds. So just also recognize that becomes a pretty unmovable structure until the sunshine comes out.
Now, is there any filtration process in that wattle? Will it filter out any of that carbon ash?
Yeah, oh yeah, and it basically, it's just a giant thing of straw
Yeah.
in there. Yeah, it's gonna filter out some carbon. I wouldn't, as far as like the nutrients go. Is that what you're asking?
No, just trying to keep it away from the fishery.
Yeah, it will. It will filter out some, but it's not gonna be a perfect solution. If you had to put a wattle down and then you put like some straw bales within, right on the uphill side of the wattle, just be cautious that when you're collecting all that, you're creating a massive amount of structure that either is gonna stop the water or is gonna get moved by the water. And if it gets moved by the water, you're in a much, much larger trouble than that. So
Well, or it'll move, well, if it stops the water, the water will collect it.
the water will collect and hopefully keep running down to where you have placed it or where you want it to go. but if that water's too much and it moves that,
It'll blow it out.
now you've got a 4,000-pound problem along with water. Okay, so, yes, sir,
To help him, I'm involved with the golf course up there.
yes, sir.
Something we do with waddles and bales and that, unless you can dig a catch basin to hold the water. Water doesn't soak into the soil real quick up here. I mean, we don't have soil, we got fresh rock. So we take the stuff and, we put it, and we create little openings in it to, and, let's say you got two of them like this far apart. You got an opening, now you got another one down here that catches it. And you try to trickle it out over a large area so that it can soak in. And once you get it running, you aren't stopping it. It's gonna, I mean, it's like running off this floor here. But that, we've been very successful out there, cause we got ponds there. In fact, we take the water from your lake and that's how we run the golf course. Kind of, but, you know, we divert it in several different directions so they can soak a little here, a little there, a little there. Cause we can't dig a catch pond in the middle of the fairway.
He's talking about staggering,
Thank
so where this one ends, you'd have the middle of the next one down the hill. Does that make sense?
Like lane bricks.
Yeah, basically, yeah, exactly, like lane bricks, so you're just staggering
Yeah.
your, you know, you don't have this one giant cut, where the water's gonna run straight through,
Good.
so.
Are you in Columbine proper?
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Well, I would imagine Columbine's probably been in communication with, Northern Water. I'm south of town and off the Red Top Ditch, I know they're gonna be putting in silt basins to help, with the water, and then also there's gonna be for, the, debris flow. And you could communicate, with them, and you can go online and kind of see what they're making, and you can do a smaller home DIY type thing as well.
Great.
That would probably be, useful to you.
But we were one of the unfortunate on the lake that got burned, and so we're trying to keep it out of the lake.
Well, and I would imagine Columbine is doing that, they should be for you.
They're not doing
They're
anything,
doing a little bit on the open space.
but nothing.
And then are you following their?
And in the ditch, they're doing it in the ditch, but they're not,
The Harbison ditch.
but they're not gonna do anything on those 3 lots where we are next to the open space because, well, it's not their property, so they don't do it. So we're just trying to keep it from going in there.
I foresee a lake dredging project in your future.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
maybe right.
Well, yeah, that's,
You're gonna go from a really nice deep lake to not as deep of a lake.
We should bring that up to Dave then,
Yeah.
and Mark and everybody,
That's a
because
great idea.
it's effective, it'll affect all
it'll
of
be
us.
yes, an effect for
It'd
everybody.
be great fishing by the end of the summer. All the fish would be down at the bottom, the deepest part of the lake.
Can you put the seeds out on snow?
No, I would not recommend that. That becomes really, really nice bird food, and then as that snow melts, it's gonna move. It's gonna, once it turns water. The snow, you're really, if you're putting seed with snow, you wanna put the snow on top of the seed. So that's, let the snow do its job. But if, you can put it on snow, that works like back east, where that snow melts really fast, and the soil is able to grab that seed. That does not work in Colorado. Colorado, you're giving the seed to nature and you're saying, here you go, have a nice day, I'll see you when I see you. So, yeah, I would not do that.
Some areas I've seeded, then I take my shovel and I put the snow on top of that
Oh,
seed,
yeah.
and that helps to, maybe melt out that snow a little faster, and then I can seed that area.
When you're getting that Halloween storm coming up at the end of this year, I know we're talking about springtime now, and you have a long, long road ahead of you for this summer. But if you're thinking through for next fall, your best time to seed is when that naturally would come off that plant and be on the ground level and be ready for winter to help plant that seed. That is your number one time to seed, especially up here. Anybody else?
I have this series as well.
Absolutely, that's fine.
When you're mixing wildflower seed in with the native grass seed, how does that affect the seeding rate, like the, poundage per acre?
What I try to tell people, when you're doing wildflowers, you look out into a meadow, and there's penstemons and some columbine growing out here. That took 3,000 years.
Yeah.
When you're spending your hard-earned money, because the flowers cost a lot more than the grass, dedicate a spot for the flowers. so that they're not competing against the grass. The
Mm.
grass is, I mean, if you really think about the flowers, like if you look up on that hillside up there, if flowers were really successful at their job, that thing would be covered. It looked like the Sound of Music, but it does not. It looks like the old John Wayne Western.
Right,
And so really dedicate a spot for your flowers.
okay,
A good planting rate for flowers. 1 pound of flower seed typically will cover about 2,000 to maybe 4,000 square feet. A good old fashioned mountain mix that these guys carry right here at Cold Springs covers about, I would say 2,500 square feet for 1 pound of seed. And dedicate that, and that way, if somebody's coming in with a weed sprayer, you know, because there's another aspect to this, that you're gonna find out, there's some weeds that have been hiding in that soil for a really long time.
that was.
And the crop of thistle from 1943, all of a sudden has got sunlight and the open ground to grow, and you're like, holy smokes. I promise you guys, the seed industry, whether it's my seed, whether it's the Conservation Service seed, whether it's anybody's seed, we're not that bad. We don't put thousands of pounds of thistle or whatever seed into our seed mixer. That is actually within the soil, and that's going to show up this summer. So just understand that that's probably something I should have mentioned a little prior to this. It's not in the seed, but that being said, if you have a dedicated area of wildflowers, you know that you're not gonna spray that, you're not gonna treat that chemically, or you might go into the grass and treat some weeds.
Yeah, weeds was one of my questions, so you covered most of it, but if people aren't planning to rebuild or do anything else,
Mhm.
should they, at the very minimum, seed something so that to prevent those noxious plants from taking over? Or will
Yes.
it be a kind of a balance of, native things coming back up?
It all depends on what was there before, and what was thriving before. The one thing I would say about weeds, for this year especially, don't be afraid of it.
Yeah,
Like, we want ground cover.
Yep.
We'll deal with them down the road, but the yellow mustard, the yellow clover, that thing's gonna have a field day. It was already having a field day in Colorado, and that's that first very yellow flower that you see. It looks like alfalfa. That's actually a clover. Leave that be. We'll deal with them down the road. That's a great plant to have. So I wouldn't worry about treating weeds this summer.
But
If the-
things like noxious weeds, like oxeye daisy.
Yeah,
fenless
I really
camomile.
wouldn't worry about them. They were gonna grow anyways. I mean, you can spray them, but if you're gonna spray them, I would make sure there's something growing in its place.
Okay,
But yeah, good old fashioned oxeye daisy, or that flowering chamomile that gets everywhere.
got it.
That flowering chamomile, that's why, that old red clover is thick as thieves with oxeye daisy, flowering chamomile. That thing gets in that category for me. Cause I can't even take it out with the food. I mean, it is brutal to try to get out. That root has got to stretch 4 feet down. As long as you're replacing noxious weed, that'd be my best answer. And
Yeah.
treat the weeds. If you're not gonna replace it, let them be for a minute.
Okay.
We'll deal with the weed problem down the hill.
Yeah.
Let's not get the erosion problem here.
And then one more thing about wetlands.
Mhm.
Is the seed appropriate for wetlands? I know they're very sensitive, real true wetland areas. Is that,
Yeah,
There's some
if you have a real true wetland area, you would probably wanna talk to Peggy and Sean and say, hey, I've got a wetland area, this is what the county recommends. Can you call your seed guy and let's find out? Once you find out the price, and then we use smelling salts to wake you up. After that, because wetland seed, I've done some harvesting of it. You get in your waders and you get in your best duck wading and duck hunting gear, and you go out and just start hand chopping seed. Well, anybody who wants to do that is not gonna just sell it for $1 a pound. It's gonna be a decent price. So just be careful what you're putting back in there. I wouldn't get too funky on the wetlands. I would just go with a couple of the very standard sedges, some of the rushes, some of those things. Even some of these wheatgrasses that are in here, slender wheatgrass, intermediate wheatgrass, things like those, mountain rose, they don't mind wet feet. They really don't. That's something you would find in a wetland. I wouldn't worry too much with flowers. Flowers are great for weathering. The right flower mix is great for weathering.
Yeah.
Typically, when you look at a flower seed mix, like if you look at a native, I think it might be in our mountain mix. It is not. Our mountain mix is got penstemons, columbines, it's godetias. Some are native, some are not. Some of those love the wet feet. Some of those are gonna say sayonara, see you later on that. So when you put flower seed into a wet area, you're only gonna get about a quarter to a half of those flowers growing. But at least you're gonna get some of that really established, good establishment in there. One thing to mention on flowers, perennials do not flower the first year from seed. Perennials only grow up as plants. Sometimes you'll get one, every once in a while you get a black-eyed Susan or a daisy here or there, maybe even a columbine. But for the most part, when you plant some flower seed, you're gonna get some annuals that are gonna be colorful. But you're gonna be like, man, I got gypped. There's no columbine, there's no penstemon. I mean, it says right here on the label, columbine and penstemon. They're there, you just gotta recognize the plant, you gotta recognize the leaf structure on it. Just something to keep in mind. Any further?
I think that's it.
Okay, anyone else? Oh, I'm gonna go on back.
So we have hayfields that were very lightly burned that move so fast. Would you recommend holding off on irrigating those fields until much later in the year than normal?
I would, and here's where I'm gonna give you a very honest answer. On a hayfield that were lightly burned, I don't think you need to seed. I would really wait and see what comes back up. Nature did you a favor at that point, where they just went through.
Controlled burn that
Yeah.
a lot of other people do in the area annually, they do controlled burns.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like burn the ditch, burn whatever. I mean, that's, so I would wait to irrigate, definitely, and really try to get those plants established. But if it only burned lightly, you'll be shocked. I mean, that field's coming back probably as close to, maybe if not a little bit thicker than it was, with the same species, those same plants. The only change you'll notice, you might notice some of those species are gonna be a little more aggressive in coming back in to the field than the other ones. So some of the rye, some of the bromes, those might come right back in, as opposed to the wheatgrasses and some of the other, there are fescues and there are meadow bluegrasses that are gonna take a little bit longer to establish themselves. So, to answer your question, I would hold off on irrigating until you can't see that soil and then really irrigate lightly. So you just wanna make sure that there's enough plant cover to accept that water, that you're not just giving away water. And I'm not an expert in water law, but I know sometimes you do have a use it or lose it. You know, if that's part of it, you might talk to your water district and say, hey, we gotta get this established. We're not gonna start irrigating until after the first cutting, or after, even if you do get a cutting on that, so. Any other questions? Sir, did you have one?
Taken care of.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Back on the topic of this soil, how do you know is there a way to tell how far down the soil has been sterilized, how far down should you break?
Usually if it burned hot enough to sterilize it, you're talking at minimum 1 to 2 feet. Maximum it could be, the growing. You'll find out at some point when there's nothing coming back up as far as the grass species, where it really, really gets, the reality soaks in of how deep that burn. You remember those tree roots, some of those tree roots were down 10 feet. If those aren't coming back, if you're not seeing trees growing back, that really, it took, for this fire, and I haven't looked at the bear reports, but this fire, I don't think you guys got maybe a couple spots were that concentrated, but I'm not totally sure that this one, especially as late in the year as it was.
We got a satellite image of 3,800 degrees.
Yeah, and that's satellite, so that's coming off.
And that's off a house.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, 3,800, it's a lot, but remember, that ground, the insulation, to really get a good killing, I mean, that's gotta be, I don't know the temperatures wise, but it's gotta have gone down there. Heat rises, that's the one great part about you know, fire, remember, heat rising, so it wasn't wanting to go down and melt and get into there, so. But that's probably more of a question for a fire expert, which I am not. Yes, ma'am?
We had a guy from CSU Extension in Granby come and walk our property with us and to tell us, and he said that we were fine, that it hadn't burned or
Good.
below, so that's just, an option is to talk to
Sure.
him.
You'll see pockets of it, you definitely will. You'll see pockets of it where you had some minerals, where you have some rocks. I mean, if you got a boulder that you didn't realize was as big as this greenhouse, and it has a lot of metallic properties to it, if that fire was pretty hot around it, you had some trees that were really, really cooking it, that thing became a glowing ember at that point. So you might see something like that, but this, from what I understand, this fire moved fast enough. As destructive as it was on the top, I don't think we have a massive amount of soil that's been sterilized yet. So,
Yeah, I think the wind really helped out. Another good way to notice there is, if you're seeing black, that's a good thing. If you're seeing whites and grays, like up towards Sun Valley, you know, I think that place really got cooked.
mhm.
And we're gonna see that coming back really, really slowly as compared to all these areas that are a little more black in color.
Correct.
Yeah, I did some field observation with Colorado State Forest Service, touching on what he was talking about. Okay, so most of, the stands that were affected, lodgepole pine, and we know lodgepole pine isn't a deep-rooted tree. And you can see evidence if you, on your land or neighbors, wherever, where it burned through the root system. If the ground is still black, and then you'll see, spots on the ground where it's gray or white, and it's usually like a line. And at one end of that, you probably see a burnt out tree. Well, a tree laid on the ground and continued to burn in those areas. And I was told those white and gray areas were the more high temperature heat, affected, terra firma there.
Doesn't always mean to sterilize it, even the white, it doesn't always mean, that could just be the leftover ash, that came in with the winter.
Yeah.
So, it usually, when you're looking at a full-scale sterilization of an area, say it's 100 by 100, or whatever it may be, it's pretty simple to tell. I mean, it just looks like the surface of the moon.
Yeah,
There is no gray line in there, there's nothing in there.
right.
It is just, it looks like moon dust at that point. So,
And even right after the fire and going into the field, we were already seeing sprouts of green coming up
Mhm.
before then the snow came in. And another thing interesting enough that was really cool, well, we've known, the pine cones, we always thought, you know, serosinous, they need high temperature to open up, to receive. Well, we found mechanical removal of beetle killed trees, well, and, you know, pine cones being dropped and, you know, skid steers going through whatnot, and a lot of regen coming in. But it was interesting that we saw areas where, yeah, the seed, and, you know, like, wow, check it out, there's new seed right on top of the ground.
that was held in the seed bank, most likely. There, you know, you have a seed bank, we're talking about those weeds, there's a seed bank of the last 1,000 years of seeds dropping in,
Yeah.
dropping on. Came in on my car this morning, they came in on your horse hay, they came in on a lot of things. So you have a bank of seeds in that soil. Hopefully it's the right seed, hopefully it's the right plant, but yeah, that is, a lot of seeds, a lot of forest plants they want to burn. You know, this is how, I mean,
You know,
our lives are short compared to what nature really, really wants and tries to do for regenerating itself into a healthy forest. You know, it wants the fire, unfortunately.
and using straw, not hay, when you're covering.
Yeah,
Cells
try to
in
use
and
straw. You guys are gonna, you know, there's gonna be a couple things that are gonna come in here. You can see a lot of cheatgrass, which is a brome species, but it loves fire. Even up here, cheatgrass is hard to get rid of. It just is. Try to fight it with, you know, this first year, you're gonna be like, haha, this is great. The thing about cheatgrass goes dormant about 4 weeks after it grows green. So it becomes much more of a fire hazard than it does a fire benefit. Because at that point, right in the middle of summer, when the fire hazard picks right back up, you have an entire ground level full of dry grass that can move a fire faster than the wind. So that's one thing to remember about cheatgrass. Looks great in springtime, not your friend in the middle of summer. Plants like penstemon, columbine, anytime when you're looking at flowers or even pine trees, you're looking at dark, hard seeds. Dark, hard seeds like temperature extremes, whether it's the cold temperature extreme, like the columbine, or a hot temperature extreme, like a pine nut, like a pine seed. They like, anytime you see a real small, dark seed, those seeds usually are typically wanting in extreme weather to be able to germinate. A lot of times, and this is not an always thing, and never always, but a lot of times, those plants have pretty good root systems. Because if you think about if it wants to go through that type of weather extreme, it's gonna be down 2-3 feet down to the ground just to be able to come back up the next year, whether it was through fire or through cold weather. So.
Unless the bulls get them. They're tenacious. I've tried so many things, and I found that they were destructive for my ornamentals in my gardens of wildflowers. And the only thing I found in the last 2 years, because when I first moved up here, I was excited and, I just made a garden. I've had to take things out. I'm lucky I have a dome that I can move my plants into, and I've had to elevate my planting beds. The landscaping fabric and a real small sheet, poultry, metal.
Oh, yeah.
And then plant them, and they have not been able to get in there, and I haven't seen any crawl over now. That's not talking about chipmunks and
You
squirrels.
put things like daffodils in, for some reason, they don't like daffodils.
Yeah.
You put tulips in, then it's an aphrodisiac.
Oh, yeah.
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 But yeah, there's certain things that you will survive wolves,
Yeah.
but not what.
Yeah.
But they said, the cat, and I know some people that have done that and it's been successful, and it's just like, I don't want to have, even though it's a barn cat, I know my husband, it will be me taking care of the cat, get it spayed, neutered, shot, whatever, and feed it, and I'm allergic to cats.
I heard on a radio show, this is just on one of the podcasts that I listen to, the #1 destructive species in the world is the domesticated cat.
Yeah.
Kills more
Birds.
natural animals than any other species,
Yeah.
including humans, across the world.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
keep that in mind before you get a cat.
Yeah.
Sorry, little
Oh, that's
kitty
okay.
cat. My cat.
I have one, she doesn't get to go outside.
Right, yeah, mine doesn't either. And the good news is, if the soil's dead, the bulls are dead. So, they didn't make it through the fire anyways.
No, I'm on the fringe of the fire in my personal home, so
Yeah.
everything's moved up.
Oh, yeah, no, then you got double the critters at that point.
Yeah.
My neighbor made this horrendous concoction. It's eggs, I think it's eggs, lemon juice, and cayenne pepper and water. And then they let it sit in the sun for like 2 weeks and put it in the bowl bowls, and they moved out as quick as they could.
And then your neighbor left for the winter, right? Yeah. Hasn't come back to get the spring thaw. Any other questions? I see people circling out of here. Thank you guys for your time. I am happy to keep answering any questions. Thank you. Hopefully we got that all on tape. Here, me talking about people unmasked with my name.